Welcome to our workshop of pornography, addiction, effects, and prevention.
It's okay. See.
I grew up in a wonderful home with two dedicated and loving parents, one of 5 brothers and sisters. A home where we as children were the focus of my parents' lives, where we regularly attended church, 2 Christian parents who did not drink, they did not smoke, there was no gambling, there was no physical abuse or fighting in the home. Basically, I was a normal person. I wasn't some guy hanging out at bars or a bum. I wasn't a pervert in the sense that, people look at somebody and say, I know there's something wrong with them, just tell. I mean, I was essentially a normal person. I had good friends. I led a normal life, except for this one small but very potent, very destructive segment of it that I kept very secret, very close to myself, and didn't let anybody know about it. And part of the shock and horror for my dear friends and family years ago when I was first arrested was that there was no clue. They looked at me and they looked at the all-American boy. And it happens, it happened in stages, gradually. It doesn't necessarily, not to me at least, happen overnight. My experience with, I say pornography generally, but with pornography that deals on a violent level with sexuality, is that once you become addicted to it, and I look at this as a kind of addiction, like an addiction, you keep craving something which is harder, something which gives you a greater sense of excitement, until you reach the point where the pornography only goes so far. You reach that jumping off point where you begin to wonder if maybe actually doing it will give you that which is beyond just reading about it or looking at it. Listen, I'm no social scientist, and I haven't done a survey. I mean, I don't pretend that I know what John Q. Citizen thinks about this. But I've lived in prison for a long time now. And I've met a lot of men who were motivated to commit violence just like me. And without exception, every one of them was deeply involved in pornography, without question, without exception, deeply influenced and consumed by an addiction to pornography. There's no question about it. The FBI's own study of serial homicide shows that the most common interest among serial killers is pornography. Those of us who have been so much influenced by violence in the media, in particular pornographic violence, are not some kinds of inherent monsters. We are your sons and we are your husbands. And we grew up in regular families. And pornography can reach out and snatch a kid out of any house today. He snatched me out of my home. They snatched me out of my home 20, 30 years ago. And as diligent as my parents were, and they were diligent in protecting their children, and as good a Christian home as we had, and we had a wonderful Christian home, there is no protection against the kinds of influences that are loose in the society that tolerates.
So this is the story of Ted Bundy, and obviously, as you can see, he was addicted to pornography. So, addiction, there's 2 types of addictions. There is substance addiction and process addiction. So viewing pornography would fall under the category of process addiction. When you first see a pornographic image, it may not affect you at all, or it may pique your interest and you want to see more. And this is how the addiction starts. So addictions manifest themselves in 3 different phases. First, there's the craving for the addiction to happen. It doesn't matter what the addiction is, whether it's pornography, drugs, shopping, food, anything. You just have to have it, and you think about it, and you want it. The next phase is the loss of control over its use. And this is usually the phase when others become aware of your addiction, because it is hard to hide something when you have lost all control concerning it. It consumes you. No matter where or what you're doing, you can only think of your addiction. The third phase is continuing the addiction even though you know the harmful consequences and the havoc it could wreak on your life. It does not matter the consequences, the addiction controls you, and you will do anything for it, no matter the cost. So if you're addicted to pornography, for example, it wouldn't matter if it ended your marriage or if you lost your job, because you were able to view that pornography, whether it was, at work or wherever. You just had to have it, and it didn't matter that your life ends in shambles. You have to have that addiction. Today we recognize addiction as a chronic disease that changes both brain structure and function. Just as a cardiovascular disease damages the heart and diabetes impairs the pancreas, addiction hijacks the brain. The pleasure principle is how this addiction hijacks your brain. So to explain the pleasure principle, the brain registers all pleasures in the same way, whether they originate with a psychoactive drug, a monetary reward, or a sexual encounter, or a satisfying meal. In the brain, the pleasure has a distinct signature. It's the release of dopamine. So addictive drugs provide a shortcut to the brain's reward system by flooding the nucleus accumbens with dopamine. The hippocampus lays down memories of this rapid sense of satisfaction, and the amygdala creates a conditioned response to certain stimuli. Addictive drugs, such as pornography, for example, can release 2 to 10 times the amount of dopamine that a natural reward does, such as eating a good meal. And they do it a lot more quicker and a lot more reliably. So in a person who becomes addicted, brain receptors become overwhelmed, and the brain responds by producing less dopamine or eliminating dopamine receptors. An adaptation similar to turning down the volume on a loudspeaker when the noise becomes too loud, or walking out of a room so it's not as loud on your ears. So in this picture, it depicts just what I was explaining. So on the left, you have a healthy brain. In the middle, you have a brain addicted to heroin, and on the right, you have a brain addicted to porn. So as you start to view those pornographic images and the dopamine is released within your brain and it gets that overload, the dopamine receptors start to they block themselves and they start to not be there, and so it starts to eat away at your brain because your brain isn't functioning normally. So that's how your brain becomes rewired. And so you can obviously see the difference when looking at this. So after a period of time, the brain adapts to the dopamine overload and produces less dopamine receptors. This in turn lessens the pleasure that one gets from the addiction, such as porn. When a porn addict, or any other addict for that matter, reaches this point, they must view more porn to get the same pleasure out of it. And this is called tolerance. So just as Ted Bundy shared, it started out with softcore porn, and then gradually it got harder and more violent. And as you build a tolerance, you need more to get the same pleasure or the same reaction. And this is how why it becomes an addiction, because you build up a tolerance and you need more and more and more. So once you have become tolerant, compulsion takes over. The pleasure associated with an addictive drug or a behavior subsides, and yet the memory of the desired effect and the need to create it, or the wanting or the craving, persists. The hippocampus and the amygdala store information about environmental cues associated with the desired substance so that it can be located again. These memories help create a conditioned response, an intense craving whenever the person encounters those environmental cues. So cravings contribute not only to the addiction, but to relapse after a hard-won sobriety. A person addicted to heroin may be in danger of relapse when he sees a hypodermic needle, for example, while another person might start to view pornography again if left alone in a room with a computer. Conditioned learning helps explain why people who develop an addiction risk relapse even after years of abstinence. So that's why people are counseled that have gone to like addiction recovery programs. They're counseled to stay away from their triggers so that they don't have a relapse. Once the addiction happens, it is very hard to rewire the brain back to normal, and this leads to many ill effects on your lifestyle.
All right, let's go ahead and talk about some of the effects of a pornography addiction. My computer's being slow. Here we go. Okay. A lot of times we think that addictions are just between us and our addiction. But anyone who knows anyone that's had an addiction knows that that's absolutely not true. Pornography is no different. It's not just between you and your screen. Pornography affects so many aspects of your life, including and mostly with your intimate relationships, mostly with your spouse or with your family. Going through some of the therapy sites, there have been comments on the bottom saying, oh, I like looking at porn and it's super natural and normal. Sure, I don't like having intercourse with my wife anymore. I'd rather look at porn, but it's totally fine. Or they'll say, yes, I love my wife and I love being with her, but I can no longer achieve erection or orgasm without viewing those images in my mind. So this definitely leads to problems with intimacy, sexual dysfunction, and most of the time we think of sexual dysfunction as the older men and they'll take a pill and they're fine. But this can occur in younger men, and 99% of the time in younger men, it stems from a psychological condition, and most of the time that is a pornography addiction. So this obviously leads to marital problems and eventually a lot of divorces. In the Scroll just last October, there was an article published from a wife's perspective of a pornography addiction addict, and she says, I am the wife of a man with a pornography addiction. Those words took me time to accept. They are scary to say, yet it is worse to say nothing. After our marriage, I noticed slight behavioral and mood changes in my husband, getting up in the middle of the night, increased irritability, and answers of avoidance or ones that reversed fault. He gradually distanced himself from spiritual activities such as personal scripture study, prayer, and priesthood leadership in the home. Combined, these habits indicated a greater issue, but I determined that I had worked too hard in life for such an issue in my marriage, so I brushed my questions away unanswered. I was sure I had found someone impervious to this temptation. As of 2008, an estimated 9 out of 10 young men and nearly 1/3 of young women reported using pornography, according to the September 2004 enzyme. If the numbers are not enough of a shock, think about the word using. So she quoted that in her article, and again, that was from the Scroll, which is the BYUI campus newspaper. If you're paying for pornography or for pay-per-view, this can definitely lead to financial problems, as we would expect. And financial problems are the #1 written cause of divorce that people cite. So some of the other effects of a pornography addiction include high-risk sexual practices, which if you're not, or even if you are in a close relationship, if there's infidelity or whatever, you can be more prone to having multiple partners because you think it's normal when you're watching pornography. You're not as prone to have safe sex. You don't use protection against STDs, and that can definitely affect you long term. If you're viewing pornography, especially at work or school, you're going to obviously encounter problems there. So those could be job loss, grade reduction, not graduating, or even becoming employed. If you have morals that kind of contradict your use of pornography, such as we do in the church, those people will usually experience shame or guilt after viewing. And then a pornography addiction can also lead to aggression or antisocial behaviors. There's a lot of aggression, like Ted Bundy talked about, within pornography and within a bunch of the media that we see today. And when we talk about antisocial behaviors, that can definitely include not wanting to be around other people for obvious reasons. But from a psychology standpoint, these are also different behaviors, such as the ones she stated in the scroll: irritability, answers of avoidance, or ones that reverse fault. They don't want to take the blame upon themselves. They may get angry quickly. So these are behaviors that go against social norms or against society, and that can develop from addiction, from an obvious addiction with pornography.
Okay, prevention. It's easy to think that we know what our spouses and children are doing. It's easy to think that our loved ones will never get involved with pornography. But because of modern technology, we are all exposed to sexual explicit materials. The average age of exposure to pornographic content is 11 years old. 1 in every 5 research on a mobile phone is for pornography. Studies have shown that 90% of boys and 60% of girls are exposed to pornography before 18. And this exposure causes children to continue the habit into adulthood. 60% of young adult men and 18% of women use porn at least once a week. These statistics are disturbing. We must protect our family, but how? The following steps can help us to fight pornography. Educate our children by talking to them about the risks of pornography and explaining why it's bad for our mental health. Good communication with our spouses and children. Benjamin Irwin said, "Pornography and other addictive behaviors thrive in secrecy. That's why it's so important to cultivate relationships of trust and honesty in the home. When children are exposed to pornography, you don't want them to keep it secret. You want them to talk about it, not so you can lecture, but so you can talk. Avoid any kind of stimulating material at home. We must not open our homes to any kind of indecent material, whether they're movies, magazines, or websites. Avoid being alone while surfing the internet for long hours. It's important that we protect ourselves as well as others. Spending long periods of time on the internet increases the possibility to finding something we're not looking for. Manage the amount of time family members spend surfing on the internet. The more time we spend on the internet, the more chances we get involved in pornography we have. Place computers and televisions in open areas at home. Keep the computer and only open in high traffic areas of the house so others can be around. If you have a computer in a closed office at work, make sure your employer has a good filters and support a strict anti-pornography policy at work. Install filters on computers, mobiles, phones, tablets, etc. Even with the most successful filtering system, some images and messages are going to get through. That's why parents need to cultivate a kind of open, honest relationship in which children are comfortable with talking about the things they are seeing and experiencing. Teach children to use chat groups, instant messages, and social networking sites with caution. Children are starting to be exposed to sex early, and it's important to prepare them before they learn about it from someone else. Because of social media, our children can have contact with all kinds of people. If our children have access to the internet, we should revise their search history and visit sites. Pornography addiction can be entirely avoided, but by being wise and thoughtful with how you spend your time, you can steer clear of pornography. We shouldn't have to wait until it becomes a full-fledged addiction to make some changes. Prevent addiction by prevent exposure. If you feel that you have a pornography addiction, don't wait any longer. There are many resources to help you. Find help and be free again.
Will believe what I'm saying now, that there is loose in their towns and their communities people like me today whose dangerous impulses are being fueled day in and day out by violence in the media in its various forms, particularly sexualized violence. And what scares me, and let's come into the present now, because what I'm talking about happened 20, 30 years ago, that is, in my formative stages. And what scares and appalls me, Dr. Dobson, is what I see, what's on cable TV. Some of the movies, I mean, some of the violence in the movies, they come into homes today with stuff that they wouldn't show in X-rated adult theaters 30 years ago. This stuff,
The slasher movies that you're talking about.
that stuff is, I'm telling you, from personal experience, the most, that is graphic violence on screen, particularly as it gets into the home to children who may be unattended or unaware that they may be a Ted Bundy who has that vulnerability to that predisposition to be influenced by that kind of behavior, by that kind of movie, that kind of violence.
Describing porn's effect in the U.S. society, Dr. Jeffrey Over of Princeton University said, "It is though we have devised one character, usable as a set of links on home and injected directly to the brain through the eyes. Don't be fooled. Porn is a drug." Thank you so much for viewing our presentation.